Good evening. Thank you so much for your patience. We were off in a breakout room chatting and getting ready for tonight. On behalf of the USC Alumni Coordinating Council, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to our conversation with Andrew Morton, led by our very own board member, Julie Chan. I am Meredith Weiss, and I have the honor of being chair of the USC Alumni Coordinating Council. And we're so excited to host this event in collaboration with all of our women's groups here at USC. So during the event, please feel free to utilize your chat at the bottom to ask questions and to participate in tonight's event. As most of you know, a key goal of our USC alumni organizations is to support the current students of our university. And these groups have worked tirelessly to raise scholarship funds through benefits and personal donations. To the members here tonight, thank you for your dedication and your loyalty, and most importantly, for your believing in our Trojan family and for our students. And to all of our friends here who aren't part of these groups, thank you for being with us. I know we're all anxious to hear from our special guests. I am too. One thing before I go, we are running an opportunity drawing today to benefit USC student scholarships. All donations are tax deductible and will count towards your university total if you're keeping track of that. So please give generously. You'll have until the end of the interview to participate, and I'll stick the donation link in the chat unless somebody else can do it for me while I'm introducing Julie. So thank you so much for being here. And now I would like to introduce Julie Chan, one of our ACC board members and the woman behind the book, Beyond the Book with Julie, the name of her show. Julie Chan is a fellow USC grad who worked for the USC Alumni Association in the early 2000s. So some of you may know her from that. She managed all the women's groups, including ours, ACC, and built friendships with many of you throughout the years. Julie went on to become a morning news anchor and producer and host of her one-hour show on a CBS affiliate. 3 years ago, she began interviewing book authors for private events. Throughout COVID, she has and continues to interview authors of all genres on her Instagram page at The Julie Chan Show. Many of us are fans. The author interviews are every Thursday from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., and you can catch them live or even recorded later. Julie just began yesterday a new show on her YouTube channel, The Julie Chan Show, or Passion Meets Purpose. She interviews people of all walks of life and who are pursuing their passion and lighting up themselves and those around them through products, services, nonprofits, and many other creative ways. Check out The Julie Chan Show on YouTube live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. and catch the half-hour show later on. So please meet Julie Chan, who will introduce our special guest.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It is great to be here with all of you Trojans, and I know I have other friends in the room. Thank you for being with us tonight. This is really exciting. Some of you were at my home a year ago, just before the pandemic started, when Andrew Morton was the last author that I hosted in my home for the private events that I would host with different authors. And there were over 120 people there that day, as Megan and Harry, as you see them right here behind me. They've joined me tonight. Isn't that so nice of them? And they were just leaving England and were in Canada. And so Andrew Morton was releasing a book and was telling us all about what his thoughts were on that. And now he is here today to tell us all about what he thinks is going on in the monarchy and to share about his new book that many of you have already received and some of you will be receiving in the next week. Andrew Morton, he went to the University of Sussex in England. He then became a tabloid journalist and worked for many outlets, including the Daily Mail. He went on to write biographies, and many of the biographies he's written include American celebrities like Madonna, Angelina Jolie, Tom Cruise, Monica Lewinsky, and many, many more. And he's very well known as being the royal biographer internationally for writing Catherine's true story, their wedding day, and he can tell us a little bit about that. Their 10-year anniversary is coming up next week. And his latest book, of course, which is right behind me, Elizabeth and Margaret. And we're so excited to have him with us today. Andrew Morton, without further ado, come join me here. Hello. You're on mute.
Mute myself. There we are. Am I still muted?
Nope, you're there.
You have me now. Yeah. And do you have a backdrop of a view of London? I hope you do. I chose it. I'm actually Montecito, which is, of course, the new royal alternative court.
Exactly. You're having dinner with Meghan tonight, right?
Harry and Meghan. Well, she's had to call off. And I've called, well, actually, I've dumped her in favor of you, Julie. So we can,
thank you. Well, you've dumped her in favor of all of these Trojans. Well, you'll be seeing her tomorrow morning for tea, I'm sure. So the last time you and I were together at my home, you were telling all of the guests about your thoughts regarding Harry and Meghan leaving the monarchy. They were in Canada at the time, and we were all speculating whether they'd come to Los Angeles, whether they would be on the Ellen show, whether Oprah would interview them. And look, sure enough, they came to LA, they left to Montecito, and they've been on Oprah. What are your thoughts of that interview?
well, I think it was their truth as they saw it. I don't think it was the truth. And it's an issue that I had with Diana. When we were doing the Diana book, she wanted the book to be called Diana, The True Story. Well, it wasn't the true story because it didn't have Prince Charles's perspective or his friend's perspective. It was the perspective of Diana and also her friends and her family. So she agreed to it being called Her True Story after some back and forth. And we even mocked up a jacket cover, now kind of historic really, called Diana, The True Story. And I think that you have the same issue with Meghan and Harry, that they've told their truth, but it's often contradictory and it doesn't seem to be based in fact. I mean, for example, the fact that they said that they were married 3 days before the actual ceremony at St. George's Chapel. Well, actually, it was a blessing. And when you can't get those things right, one has to remain a little bit skeptical about everything else. So the jury is out on, I mean, the damage has been done, of course, but the veracity of what they had to say has left many questioning aspects of it.
Yes, absolutely. What do you think, you know, in all of the tapes and in knowing Princess Diana to write her book, what would you say her take would be now on Meghan and Harry? What do you think she would say to Harry?
Well, she would actually appreciate the fact that this is a loving couple who want to make a go of it in their own way, because she was trying to do the same thing. Remember, towards the end, she was no longer part of the royal family. She was an independent humanitarian on the world stage, and she was known as Diana. People didn't call her Royal Highness Princess of Wales because she'd lost that appellation. And she was actually thinking of living in Malibu. She was talking about America as a place of openness, of somewhere where she could live. She had a boyfriend after Hasnat Khan called Teddy Forstmann, who's since passed away, but he was a billionaire to run for president, and she quite fancied the idea of being first lady. So you might have had, just to be this delicious conjecture, you could have had Meghan and Harry in the White House, with, of course, Diana as first lady. But right. In relation to what they've done, she was doing it herself. She was coming to America, and so she would have approved of that, but she wouldn't have approved of the attacks that Harry's made on his brother, because she always said to me, Harry is a backup for William in the nicest possible way, because William has got that weight on his shoulders, the weight of being the future king. And it's a lonely, lonely job, as the Queen found. And she's had the support of her sister, Margaret, as I explain in the book, with Harry attacking and sniping from the sidelines. That doesn't make his job any easier, nor, quite frankly, does it make his father's job. When you say that both men are trapped, it's, there's a bit of a sharp intake of breath, because you're basically saying the institution is inhibiting and forestalls any advance.
Now, fast forward to Prince Philip's passing, and to see Harry and William together at that funeral, walking away. What do you think that conversation was about?
Have you got jet lag? That was a good ceremony. Love the singing. It wouldn't have been anything substantive, and they were perfectly aware of the optics of the occasion. They're not fools. They looked neither to the left nor the right when they followed Philip's coffin into St. George's Chapel. When they came out, it was Catherine who was talking to Harry, and he and Catherine always got on very well. And then she dropped back and let William take over the conversation. Well, did it break the ice? Yeah. I mean, it's the first time we've seen him for over a year, and there's a few words expressed, but there's a lot that, they could do with a good 15 rounds in a boxing ring and then have a conversation.
Yeah. A lot there. Well, how do you think the Queen is doing now? I mean, she was with Prince Philip for 73 years.
Well, it's her 95th birthday yesterday. No official portrait. I mean, everybody's rallied round, as you can see. The rest of the royal family have rallied round, and I think that there's a general awareness now that we can't leave everything up to the Queen. She's 95. She's just lost her partner of 73 years. The heavy lifting now has to be done by Charles. All the big decisions have to be made by Charles and William, obviously with reference to Her Majesty. But you're going to see, as the years tick by, Prince Charles and Camilla being far more in the public eye, because remember, they're going to be the next king and queen.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so you think that she won't pass them over and give it to Prince William and Kate? Because a lot of people are still speculating that.
Well, that's been a speculation from the word go. But the Queen has never shown the remotest interest in it. What would happen if she lost her faculties and if she became physically incapacitated? She recognises, as does Prince Charles, that there would have to be what's called a regency. That's to say, somebody would take over all the functions while she recovered or didn't recover. And that would be obviously Prince Charles. But that would be an unfortunate way to end the reign. And I mean, my argument has been for years that the royal family have made abdication a dirty word. Well, it's not really. I mean, the Pope, we've had a Pope who's abdicated, the King of Spain has abdicated, the Queen of Holland has abdicated. I personally feel that you do not want a pensioner monarchy. You want a monarchy that is where the people involved are still virile and active, and because they represent the nation that you are. I mean, the way it's going to pan out for the next century, it's going to be three men: William, George, and Charles, and essentially they're all going to be pensioners. So you're in for a pensioner monarchy, which is not that sexy.
So Prince Philip had before we go on to your book and the two sisters, let's just sit on Prince Philip for a minute. He had a really hard life, actually. His childhood was not the best. And I don't know if a lot of people know that. Can you talk about, how sort of losing his mother in a way, he didn't actually lose her, but she went away, right? And she wasn't well. And talk about, how his childhood was and maybe how that shaped who he became as a father and a husband.
Well, it's a long answer to the question, but essentially, I mean, Philip, compared to Diana, Meghan, Fergie, the rest of them, had a terrible time, but in first being admitted into the royal family. But before that, he had a very difficult childhood. His mother was put into a sanatorium in Switzerland. His father ended up living on a boat with his mistress in the south of France. He was effectively at the age of 9 abandoned by his parents. His sisters went on to marry German aristocrats, so he had no family at all. He ended up living with an uncle in England, ended up going to Cheam public school or a private school, and then to Gordonston in the far north of Scotland, this experimental school run by a guy called Kurt Hahn, a German Jew who escaped from Germany during the 1930s. And he was blessed with being a Renaissance man. I mean, and that's his saving grace. He was a great all-round cricketer, very smart, questioner. He was tough. That was the thing about him. He people would tease him, people would try and bully him. He would stand up to them. He was made head boy, and he went into the Navy. And when biographers have ever asked him about, didn't you cry into your pillow at night? And he said, no, I just got on with it. And
really strong.
And he's a tough guy, strong, and you see that toughness in Princess Anne. I mean, she's tough, and you don't see that toughness in Prince Charles, because he was a sensitive boy. And then he went into the Navy under the auspices of Dickie Mountbatten, Lord Mountbatten. He was his mentor, and he met Elizabeth and Margaret at Dartmouth Naval College just before the start, in the west of England, just before the start of the Second World War. And both girls were absolutely enraptured by him, because he was devastatingly he looked like a Viking god. All the more so because little rosy-cheeked Margaret, some 9-10 years his junior, watched him eat several plates of shrimp over lunch, and she just thought that was the best thing ever. Elizabeth, who was dressed exactly the same as her sister, which is what her mother tended to do, which made her look even younger than her 13 years, was pink-cheeked as well, but she saw something in Philip that was that really struck her right in the heart, because there's been much made about Philip's infidelities and so on, but when you look at diaries of Elizabeth and Margaret and their friends during the Second World War, when Philip would occasionally return, Elizabeth was always thrilled, very excited, and she used to tell her special girlfriends that Philip was her beau, that is to say, her boyfriend, and
when they met, she was 13 and he was around 18, right?
Yeah, he was that bit older, and
he was so young.
But it's a very interesting part of the book that Margaret as well was 16 when she fell in love with Group Captain Peter Townsend during a tour of South Africa in 1947. So it's interesting that they had this family life, we four, as George VI used to call it. That's George VI, the Queen, Margaret, and Elizabeth. But it's intriguing that both girls were desperate to get away from the we four, from the past, to forge their own lifestyle, and even during their courtship, Philip had a tough time. The courtiers didn't like him. They thought he was far too progressive and modern. They thought that he was rough and ill-mannered. They thought he wouldn't be faithful to Elizabeth. They saw women just kind of fainting in flocks when they saw him. The aristocracy, they didn't like him. They thought that he was just some jumped up, junior royal from a minor royal house of Greece. Well, in actual fact, his mother was born at Windsor Castle, and that he had closer links to royalty than Elizabeth. He was great grandson of Queen Victoria. So he was more royal than Elizabeth, and yet he was sneered at by the aristocracy. Of course, the Queen and the King were nervous about allowing a very young girl who hadn't much experience of life marry this man, and they were forever putting, Earl Dalkeith and Duke this and Earl that in her way at dances that they held at Windsor Castle.
But my understanding is the king was in favor of Prince Philip. Is that not true?
Well, he was in the end, but he had to be.
But it took a while.
He had to be kind of strong-armed into it. I mean, he said to Elizabeth in 1947, "I'd like you to accompany me on this tour of South Africa," which was going to be quite a long time, and she obviously did so, and she made that famous speech where she said, "I dedicate to you my life, whether it be long or short, in the service of the nation and the Commonwealth." But she wanted to announce the engagement. They agreed to let them become engaged, but George was the father was very reticent to let go, and they were. They kind of agreed through gritted teeth.
Yeah. Do you think that their 73-year-long marriage was mostly happy, that they were mostly supportive of each other despite the things we've heard?
Well, for the most part, the answer's got to be yes. There were two big oak trees in the end. And I went to Malta as part of the research for this book, Elizabeth and Margaret, the intimate world of the Windsor sisters. And I met people who had worked for them, with them, knew them, and searching for new information. And the Queen, as Princess Elizabeth, was absolutely loved her time in Malta because she was able to be a Navy wife. He was captain of HMS Magpie, a destroyer. And they had this idyllic life as far as she was concerned. Remember, after the Second World War ended, and there was VE Day, they were on the balcony waving to people, and they had to plead with their father to let them join the crowds. And there's this famous episode where they went out to join the crowds, only after they basically kicked their father's ankles to let them out of the palace prison. And they went with all these gentlemen ushers and equerries and so on to make sure they were safe. But they loved it. But it shows you how much of their lives was spent looking out through the window of Buckingham Palace and wondering what the rest of the world was doing, and everybody else was looking into Buckingham Palace to find out what was going on. So back to Philip and Elizabeth, they loved that time in Malta, and Philip was a brilliant naval officer. He was really fast-tracked to be First Lord of the Admiralty, which is the highest naval officer in the land. And they expected George VI to last a lot longer. They thought he was, good for another 20, 30 years. But sadly, cancer took over, and he died in 1952. And that ended that 3-year idyll of living in Villa Guadalamanja, which is a lovely, well, it was a lovely old house overlooking the bay in Malta, which I went to see. And I lobbied the Maltese government to restore it, and actually it's been restored over the next few months. So I'm looking forward to going out there to have a look at it.
Very cool. What do you think the Queen will miss most about Prince Philip?
When you enter a room and you watch them, they're a double act. Prince Philip always says, when I'm walking through a lineup, I guarantee I can make somebody laugh, one or two people laugh in 5 minutes. So he's always been her backup. He's always, the cliche is he's walked behind her. Well, yes, he has, but they've also acted as a double act. She makes conversation with people. He will interject and make shy people articulate again, because people are nervous when they meet the Queen. I mean, anybody who meets says they're not are telling you a bit of a fib. Even Winston Churchill was nervous before he met the Queen, when she was Queen. So if he was nervous, I think everybody else is entitled to be. So I think what she will miss most of all is the fact that they've been this fabulous team on public events and privately, and they've just got a kind of an emotional semaphore which has communicated to each other, which is now lost. Obviously, the Queen has been used to doing her own events for years, and he retired 3 years ago. Let's not forget that. And what the Queen has seen and what we haven't seen is that essentially he's been going slowly downhill, very sadly. I mean, it was taking him, one of the reasons why he decided to retire was he would be getting up at 5 a.m, and it was spending that 5 hours to get ready to go up for an engagement. So he was declining, and obviously I've not seen him from day to day. None of us have, but obviously the Queen has seen, and that's one of I think that's one of the possible positives out of this, is that the Queen and Prince Philip have spent more time together in the last year because of COVID, because they were both sequestered at Windsor Castle, than they've spent for a long time. Because Prince Philip was a great traveller, and he was a great one for going off for weeks on end and so on. And when he was even back in London, he'd be going out in the evening making speeches and raising money for charity. So he's a bit of a Renaissance man, old Prince Philip. We took him for granted, but he was a very effective member of the House of Windsor, and will leave a legacy there, because he was a progressive man who advocated the televising of the coronation, advocated the royal family documentary of 1969, was one of the first people to talk about the environment, to talk about climate change, to talk about the disappearing species. He's always been on the right side of the argument, a man who's interested in engineering and science and logic. Interesting guy.
What do you think he's left to Prince William and Prince Harry? What lessons do you think that they will keep?
Well, I mean, Harry got on especially well with Philip, and in fact, Peter Phillips, Princess Anne's son, and William all got on well with him, because they used to go out duck shooting, they used to go out general shooting, on the estate in Sandringham, and he was a man's man. And his great phrase was, "Let's just get on with it." And he did get on with it. And don't navel gaze too much. And that's, I would say, that would be his motto.
Just move on.
And it's very unfashionable these days. We all, everything is far more contextualized.
Yes, absolutely. So let's move on to your latest book that just came out last week. And so why was it that you wanted to focus on this topic of all the things you could have chosen, the sisters?
Well, Elizabeth and Margaret, the intimate life of the Windsor sisters, came about because of another American, Wallis Simpson. Because I wrote a book about her called Wallis in Love a few years ago, which I thoroughly enjoyed doing. And reading books about it, there were all kinds of compare and contrast with the Queen or the Queen Mother. And it got me thinking about the fact that so many royals are compared to one another: Fergie and Diana, William and Harry, Bertie and Edward. And I thought, well, have a look at the relationship that has a genuine step change in it, where the princess becomes queen. And have there been any other queens with loyal sisters, querulous sisters as well, in history? And I found, well, actually there's none. So this was a unique double act, and it's a kind of what I would call a salt and pepper relationship, pretty spicy, hot and salty, and it gives you an insight into their characters, it gives you an insight into their world, and I think it's an interesting way of trying to explain a period of our history.
And how do you think they were able to support each other throughout all these years when their personalities were so incredibly different? Elizabeth being so obedient and Margaret being so disobedient. I think she even says, disobedience is my joy.
Absolutely, she did indeed. And she gave the Queen a lot of problems over the years. I mean, not just one or two, but a lot. But I think you've just struck the reason why by saying they were very different characters. I mean, the Queen was sober, studious, obedient, never kicked over the traces. Margaret was the one who you know would hide at Windsor Castle, and the guard would be called out to go look for her. She was the one who would say, you know, I'm going to be naughty today. So she was a very extrovert character who, you know, during the war, when officers would come to visit Windsor Castle, she was the one who would keep them entertained. Elizabeth was the one who was tongue-tied. When they put on pantomimes, guess who got the starring role? It wasn't the future Queen. It was the number two. It was Princess Margaret, who was, you know, the star of Cinderella or Aladdin or whatever. And people say, oh, what kind of a queen would she have made? Well, she would have made a very different kind of queen. But the thing about Queen Elizabeth II is that she's recognized in her bones that being the head of state is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a triathlon. You know, you've really got to just pace yourself. And Margaret, with her famous grouse whiskey, a cigarette at the end of her holder, crooning show tunes at 5 a.m, she wouldn't have made that 10 o'clock engagement, would she? She wouldn't have made it the investiture at 11 o'clock. She'd still be in bed. So perhaps.
And do you feel that she always understood that? And so she was glad it wasn't her in the Queen's seat.
Yes, I mean, you know, the Queen was sometimes quite envious of her sister because, you know, she might have thought, oh, you want to be Queen, do you? Well, try this for size. Go to one of these film nights, the gala film nights that's been organised for me. I have to sit through watching some wretched film. I mean, she did that, and she actually, after going to several of these gala nights, she complained to Winston Churchill, saying that it was just too boring, and that she and Margaret could go see any film she wanted with her friends, and then go to nightclubs and go dancing. And the Queen loved dancing, by the way. Don't think that the Queen was just some stick in the mud. She was a very good dancer and a good mimic, and she and Prince Philip were very light on their feet on the dance floor. And there's footage of them in Malta, you know, tripping the light fantastic.
We have a question here. Sally Edwards is asking, how far along did Elizabeth and Margaret go in their education?
Good question. Not very far. And it's one of the reasons that Margaret resented her mother. She never really forgave her mother for having this kind of rather flippant, offhand approach to education. She was the one who was told, you can't do anything on constitutional history. It was Elizabeth who was segregated from her, and the provost of Eton would come in his pony and trap from Eton up to Windsor Castle, like something out of a Downton Abbey episode, and teach Elizabeth constitutional history. And Margaret was really jealous about that, because she would, I mean, both women were very smart, and Margaret was a very fast study. And she really resented it. She resented the fact that she didn't have that critical education. And I know that many of you watching tonight, you can reflect on your own education, that, you know, if it's cut short, think back to when, if it was cut short at 13, 14, all that kind of critical thinking that is important, that you tend to learn at college, was denied to the Queen and denied to Margaret. But it was, but the Queen had the longer education. And in later life, what Margaret used to do, you would associate with various dons and lecturers and professors at Oxford and Cambridge, and, you know, she would read books of philosophy, and she'd read them with a dictionary next to her so she could look at the long words. So she was something of an autodidact. So you know, the denial of education for Margaret was something which really rankled, and that was a good question.
Another question is, what do you think about the portrayal of the Queen and her sister in The Crown?
Well, I've got to declare an interest here. I'm the consultant for series 5 of The Crown, so I can't say that I'm not unbiased. I think that The Crown has been a brilliant piece of theatre and television. The showrunner, Peter Morgan, has done an outstanding job of reinventing the monarchy for a TV Netflix audience. That said, the portrayal of the Queen and Margaret in The Crown was one of far more adversarial than it actually was. And there's some things which were definitely wrong. I mean, one of the things which I discovered in my research when I went to the National Archives in London was this whole Peter Townsend affair. Now, for those of you who don't know much about it, Peter Townsend was a war hero who was made the King's Equerry, and he was married and he had 2 kids, and he started an affair with Princess Margaret. He divorced, and Margaret and Townsend wanted to marry, but because he was divorced, they were faced with the opposition of the Church of England and also the state, because remember, just 20 years before, Edward VIII had abdicated to marry a twice divorced American. So Margaret and Townsend were on a very sticky wicket, as they say in Britain, and Margaret and Townsend felt that they had to give up their titles, give up their appellations, give up their money, go into exile. So it was a pretty draconian thing, and that the Queen was hostile to Margaret and pushed her down the road of giving up the relationship and cleaving towards the idea of duty to the monarchy and giving
And
up.
you believe that's true?
Her life. Well, that is the kind of general idea, the kind of mythology of it, and that's what as it's portrayed in The Crown. But what I discovered was that the new Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, who came in when Margaret was 25, and at 25 she didn't need the Queen's permission to marry, and he said to her, you don't need to go into exile, you don't need to give up your title, you do have to give up your place in the line of succession, but that's it. And she was 3rd, so what? And in terms of marrying in church, you'll just have to marry in a civil ceremony. The interesting thing is, Group Captain Peter Townsend never knew any of this. Margaret kept it quiet. So Margaret and Elizabeth had this bond with the Prime Minister, so that the Queen was prepared for Margaret to be happy and was prepared to take some criticism for the Crown. But Margaret never told Townsend that that they could have got away virtually scot-free, and he could have got himself a title as well. And to his dying day, he thought that they had to give up everything, or she had to give up everything, and he realized why. You know, she'd said we better kiss goodbye.
And
So
so
that's one of the elements of the Crown that they didn't get right. But you know, Margaret was this larger than life character, and the beauty of the Crown is that it's brought these secondary characters like Princess Anne to the foreground, and people have, you know, found it interesting.
And so you're a consultant on the 5th season. What is that like?
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it's a bit like this. It's a Zoom call with about 6 screenwriters, all highly intelligent, very creative people who want to know the most arcane details, like what was the color of your daughter's bedroom wallpaper, because I used to have a, you know, little office in there, and that kind of thing. So it's going to be a really interesting series, for the simple reason that it's about how I did the Diana book. So that's drama, the burning down of Windsor Castle, her various, you know, affairs, the whole, all the tapes. I mean, the 1990s was a blockbuster period for royal scandal.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think that Margaret's dislike of Diana truly stemmed from Diana's televised interview, or was it more of a deep-seated jealousy?
Is this a question?
Yes.
From you or from somebody else?
No, this is from somebody else.
Oh, well, that's a good question. She used to smile when Diana first moved into the royal family, because what they did with Diana, they did with Margaret in the 1960s. For, you know, Margaret was the most, along with Elizabeth Taylor, was the most glamorous woman on the planet, and Diana was seen as this glamorous figure. So it made Margaret smile, and she, you know, and sympathize with her position, because like Diana, she was, yes, interested in clothes and fashion, but not that interested, and they had to become interested. And more than that, they had something. They had a lot more in common. They were more metropolitan princesses, shall we say. They liked going to the theatre together, to the ballet together. Diana wanted to be a ballet dancer herself. Grew too tall. So they were good friends. They lived next door to one another. So, you know, they lived next door to one another at Kensington Palace, and they both hated Princess Michael of Kent, who lived round the corner at Kensington Palace, because she had these horrible Siamese cats that anyway, we won't go into what they used to do. But anyway, and so, you know, they would go on, they share cars together on official duties. And even when Diana and Charles separated in December 1992, Margaret wrote to Charles and said, you know, Diana's still going to be a companion of mine, and she was. But then Diana made the classic mistake in that Panorama interview of overstepping the mark as far as Margaret was concerned. She said that Prince Charles wasn't fit to be king. You all remember that, those of you of a certain age. She said that she wanted to be the queen of people's hearts. You remember that? Well, that really ruffled feathers, because the queen of people's hearts was the queen. So it was Margaret, it was Diana trying to overstretch her mandate. And Margaret was absolutely furious with her, absolutely incandescent. And she wrote to her, and she criticized her for doing the program. She ordered her staff, if there were any any magazines with Diana's face on the cover, throw them out. She wouldn't allow her children, Sarah and David, to accept birthday presents or see her. The shutters really came down. And when she died, Margaret was equally hostile. She felt that Diana should just have a family funeral organised by the Spencers, because she was no longer royal. And I remember commentating on the funeral for ABC, and I was sat next to the Barbara Walters, and we were, you know, and we were looking at the scene as the funeral cortege went by Buckingham Palace, and the Queen bowed. Everybody, all the other members of the royal family bowed, but not Princess Margaret. She didn't even forgive her in death.
Wow. That's very interesting, considering, you know, she was as disobedient as she was in so many ways, that she took it to such deep heart when she felt that Diana defied the monarchy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, she had caused the Queen a lot of problems over the years. I mean, we haven't even talked about Roddy Llewellyn, a young man, jobless gardener, 13 years her junior, who she had this romance with for many years, for like 8 years. And the Queen said to her private secretary once, how are we going to stop Margaret from this gutter snipe life? I mean, she stayed in a hippie commune with him. They went down to Mustique together. You know, they were lovers. And this was at a time in the 1970s when the word cougar meant an animal that will bite you, and a toy boy was something you might get from Hambley's. So, you know, it was a social thing more than anything else. And she was severely criticized by members of Parliament.
I love this question. Diane Cobb asks, why was Margaret allowed to grow up as a spoiled brat?
Well, good question. I mean, she was certainly spoiled. Well, they weren't that spoiled. I mean, the war intervened, and you know, they ended up having a bath where there's a mark on the side of the bath. They weren't allowed to accept presents of nylons from anybody. They weren't allowed to accept presents at all. They had a pretty austere few teenage years. But you're right. She was indulged by her father, and you know, she would come out with all the. I mean, and the courtiers didn't like her because she was spoiled, because she could be imperious one minute and very friendly the next.
So maybe just very charming to her father.
Oh yes, she absolutely adored her father. I mean, and several biographers have said, and I would tend to agree with it, that he was the love of her life. And they just had this, he used to call Elizabeth is my pride and Margaret is my joy, meaning that he was very proud of the way that Elizabeth comported herself as the heir presumptive, but just couldn't believe. And remember, he was this guy who stuttered, had knock knees, was not especially clever, not the sharpest tool in the woodshed, and he had this little cuddly bundle of joy who was funny, smart, quick, and he just thought, well, where's that come from? So, you know, he indulged her. Well, I mean, you know, as I'm a father of 2 girls, and you know, all you ever do is indulge your daughters.
But very interesting that the 2 girls really didn't have this negative jealousy that would have been really easy to have. So, you know, for the fact that some things their parents did maybe were wrong, you know, Margaret was upset at her mother for not giving her enough education. They must have been very well loved, would you say?
Yeah, they were very, very well loved, but don't think that they were like 2 little angels. I mean, Margaret was always jealous of Elizabeth, to the point where Elizabeth would shout out, "You always want what I've got," you know. So, and they'd have little fights, you know, scratching and biting and kicking and pulling hair and all that kind of thing. And Margaret always wanted what her big sister had, remember was 4 years older, which is quite a long time. But they shared the same bedroom in the early days. They, you know, had the same clothes. And in the book, I've chosen specifically some pictures of them together. in exactly the same clothes, and it diminishes Elizabeth in a way. She looks younger and more gauche and naive than perhaps she was. And Margaret would, if Elizabeth was doing history or doing something which was more academic, she would listen in at the keyhole or watch or into the room, and it was, and if she got the extra half hours to stay up, what kids are, what parents are with kids, you can stay up for another half an hour. When you get to 10, she would wheedle her way downstairs. So there was that kind of thing going on, and there was a primal jealousy too later on in life, because here was this woman who has two beautiful children, Anne and Charles, a very handsome sailor husband, has the path in life ordained for her, and here she was, she gave up Peter Townsend. She felt she was going to remain on the shelf. She was struggling to find a path in life, a role, and there was a kind of a jealousy there. And when it was the Queen's 10th wedding anniversary in 1957, she only turned up late to the wedding celebrations. It was kind of like, I can do what I like. So there was so don't run away with the idea that it was, everything was plain sailing between them.
It seems like, though, in the end, there was really, not only in the end, but throughout, there were lots of points of deep support and maybe quiet on the sidelines, and people didn't realize it. It may have looked one way, but in actuality, there was a lot of love there.
I think that's a very good point. It's it's a theme of the book that, this is about love and loyalty. And in the last year, the last decades of her life, she really rededicated herself to the monarchy and to her sister, and especially from the 1980s onwards.
And what do you think was that turning point?
Well, it was the ending of her relationship with Roddy Llewellyn. The fact that there was never any chance of them getting married. He went off and married another woman. But more than that, it was a realization too that the Queen did have a very lonely job, and it's a point I've made with regards to William and Harry. I mean, early in the interview, that Diana always saw Harry as a backup, and Margaret saw herself not so much a backup but as a supporter of Elizabeth, and Elizabeth recognised that as well. I mean, there's the highest honour she can give, personal honour, is called the Royal Victorian Chain. Prince Philip had it, but also so did Princess Margaret. None of the others have it, and it was a sign of her respect for her loyalty. And she did all the rotten, crummy second league engagements. She used to say, town clerks, which is the chief executive of a council, are all the same. So she turning up in these godforsaken parts of Britain on a wet Tuesday. I mean, she stuck it out. And but the thing is, Julie, with every member of the royal family, the media impose a narrative on you. And once you've got that narrative as the evil sister or the good sister or the bad husband or whatever, it's difficult to escape. And Margaret had the narrative of the hedonistic sister, always out partying, going to Mustique in the Caribbean, toy boy lovers.
Right.
But she was quite a religious person. She was devoted to the crown, devoted to her sister, and devoted to God.
One last question, and then I'll open it up because I know everybody has lots of questions and they're coming in the chat now. But one last one from me is, through all of your research for this book, was there one defining moment that you were surprised to learn about that you did not realize?
Well, it's a funny one, really. I just love the story that I uncovered about the Queen. The contrast between the Queen and Margaret. Margaret, yes, she went on country pursuits, but she wasn't that interested. The Queen, as we know, is a passionate horsewoman, raises gun dogs, has bloodstock, and she feels very comfortable with those people, with the racing set, you know, these characters. And she was there, she was having lunch one day with the racing set after a day's racing, and the dessert was served, and it was creme brulee, and the topping was like that thick, and people were tapping it, trying to break it, and they couldn't do it. So in the end, the Queen took off her shoe and she whacked her stiletto on the creme brulee, and so made a mark and got in and just ate it. But she wouldn't have done that.
Ate it?
And she wouldn't have done that unless it was a group of people that she could totally trust, because it was just, you know, at that moment.
Right.
And another little story I like, talking about the kind of personal dynamic of Elizabeth and Margaret, was when Harold Macmillan came to visit the Queen. I think it was at Windsor Castle, and at some point, you know, Margaret flounced into the room and said, if you weren't Queen, nobody would talk to you. Then flounced out again, you know. So, and Macmillan thought, gulp, I've come in the middle of a huge family row here. I mean, Margaret used to say that we have rows, we don't have riffs.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, I want to open it up because there are just so many questions coming in, and I want to give all of these amazing people who have joined tonight the opportunity. So if you'd like, you can go to reactions at the bottom of your screen, and you can hit the raise. If you push reactions and then you go to the raise hand, looks like we have one right now. So I will let Radine in if I can do that. There you are. Hello. I don't know how to make you side by side. Maybe we can get some support here. Oops.
Why don't you just ask the question?
Okay, go ahead. Oh, you need to unmute.
They're telling your kids that.
Oh.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, I was just wondering, you have the pictures of the four royalty behind you, and I was wondering why you don't have, especially you have Harry, but you don't have the others.
Actually,
because Julie's head is there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
do you see all of them now?
Yeah.
I was just in their way. My allegiance isn't just to Harry, don't worry. I'm not sure how to.
Is it Bonnie who wants to ask a question? Well, why don't you just ask the question?
And yes, my question is, do you think that by the time Charles is king, that he will allow Harry, do you think that Harry would be welcomed back? Say he would like to return to the royal family. Do you think that Charles as king would allow that?
That's a good question. I mean, Harry said some pretty brutal things about his father and his brother, saying that they were trapped inside the royal family. And it's a bit like in a love affair or a marriage where you say something and, you know, once you've said it, it can't be unsaid. I have to say, I was rereading some of the aspects, early interactions between Charles and Harry and Meghan, just before the wedding and after the wedding. And Harry was really, really complimentary of his father for agreeing to walk Meghan down the aisle. Charles really enjoyed Meghan's company. Harry was very fulsome in his praise for the way that his father had looked after him and taught him aspects of the environment and made him more aware. So I have to say, I was quite surprised at what Harry had to say about his father and his brother to Oprah. The chances of reconciliation, I would have thought, are slim for the simple reason that they're not going to see an awful lot of each other. And when he becomes king, the water will have washed over this particular problem. There'll be other people stepping into the breach, and you're going to see that over the next few weeks. Never mind that when Charles becomes king, you're going to see Prince Edward and Sophie Rhys-Jones, Countess of Wessex, take on more duties, more focus on them. You're going to see more focus on Kate. You're going to see more focus on Camilla. So I think that, we talked about Prince Philip and his great phrase, just get on with it. I think they're just going to get on with it. And if Harry wants to come back, then yeah, come back. But I don't think he's going to be welcomed back like a prodigal son, because they've just had to cope with, and there will not be that trust there, because they won't know if they talk to him, if it's going to end up in on TV or part of his podcast. So everybody was watching for the reconciliation at the funeral. Yes, there was a conversation, but I would say that they were very slim shoots of recovery. I think there's a lot more conversation that has to happen.
Andrew Ball is asking regarding the possibility of King Charles. Did Andrew see the Pasadena Playhouse production of King Charles III in 2017?
Yes, it was a fascinating drama that showed Diana as this ghostly figure. I think it was Kate as an absolute schemer, and it had all the elements, I think, of King Lear about it. It was a kind of modern day King Lear. It was a quite brilliant piece of theatre.
And do you think that is who Kate is?
Well, I think that Kate is shrewd, is nervous about putting a foot wrong. I don't think she's particularly scheming. She's someone who is quite shy, has found it difficult to map out her route. And we keep talking about this. It's a difficult gig to be a royal princess. It's a difficult gig to come from the outside to take it all on. It takes years, I think. And I think that Kate has become a woman in full, in her own right, and a royal in her own right, and a future queen in her own right. And I think that William and Catherine are very well placed to take over from Charles and Camilla at a suitable time.
Yes, I completely agree. Meredith is asking, Charles is in Wales right now, contemplating the work and future of the royal family. What do you think the royal family will look like and their work will be in the short term, say 1, 5, 10 years?
Okay, well, I think they've got to sit down and go back to first principles. What are we here for? What's our job? Well, our job is to represent the nation. We are the symbols of the nation. We are the representatives of Great Britain abroad. We're also head of state of a number of Commonwealth nations. So they have to get back to basics and think, right, that's our core job: meeting and greeting heads of state, entertaining them, and so on. Secondly, we have a duty to the armed forces. We are head of the armed forces, And so we need to maintain those relationships and expand them. Thirdly, is the charity work. Well, the charity work is relatively recent in royal, in the kind of royal day-to-day life. It's become important because all these royals have been looking for a job and looking for some kind of purpose and significance. So they've taken on various patronages. Now, I think Prince Charles has got something like, just from memory, something like 273 patronages. He's not going to be able to devote time to them. And one of the things about members of the royal family is that they do like to get involved in what's going on, not just to be a figurehead and never see them. And then the next thing to debate is, well, we've lost three significant members of the royal family. Prince Andrew, who could still end up in jail for all we know. I mean, you know, that he's wanted for questioning by the American police with regard to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Mm-hmm. And obviously they've also lost Harry and Meghan. I know with the tumult of the Oprah interview and so on, that Prince Charles is going to have to open some kind of private inquiry into the allegations of racism. So that's got to be addressed. So there's a number of things that have got to be addressed. And what is the Queen going to do? I mean, you know, she's now staying essentially at Windsor Castle. What's going to happen to Buckingham Palace? Buckingham Palace is being restored and renovated. If the Queen stays at Windsor Castle, should we, I mean, I've argued this for years, and I'd love it to happen. I'd love to see Buckingham Palace used as a people's palace. And they've opened it up for picnics in the gardens this summer. We all know that you can go around, look around at the picture gallery. You can look around inside at certain times of the year. I would like to see the whole place, you know, turned into a great art gallery and museum with sun and lumiere outside, concerts. I mean, remember when for one of the Queen's Jubilees, Brian May from Queen went onto the roof at Buckingham Palace and was playing this great guitar solo. So anyway, so back to Prince Charles in Wales. I think they've got a lot to discuss. His proposition over the years has been he wanted a slimmed down monarchy. Well, you know, unintentionally, he's got one.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And Kelly McBride has a question. Kelly. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay.
Press the button.
Now you're good.
Okay. Hi, Andrew. My favorite
Hi.
book is Diana, Her True Story. I am wondering if there's anything about Diana that you can share with us that we don't already know. And my second part of my question is, because of the interview with Harry and Meghan, I think Harry was very honest like his mother. Do you see the modern monarchy changing at all, especially in the face that it's, you know, in your book, you said we, the royal family, are not supposed to be human. Do you think they'll take on any of that? And with the newer royals, see any of that change?
Well, in relation to Diana, I mean, there's an awful lot being said about Diana. One of the things that is often neglected, I would say, is her sense of humor. And she always had a great sense of humor, even at the darkest time. And I mean, it would emerge from time to time in the tape. So, for example, when I was asking her about her various half-hearted suicide attempts, she chatted away about it, and then she said to James Colthurst, who was the intermediary in the whole affair, well, Andrew's pretty well written my obituary, hasn't he? So, and she kind of took it in a very light-hearted way. And I remember meeting her once on Victoria Island, just before Fergie got married to Prince Andrew back in the mid 1980s. And I was talking to her and I was saying, do you know that my surname Morton, I'm linked to Lord Morton of Scotland, and I'm probably 200 steps away from being linked to Sarah Ferguson. Well, Diana's 5'10", I'm 6'4", so she looked up and she's kind of went up on her heels and said, "I'm sure Sarah will be thrilled." So she had this sense of humor that was always there. It was kind of light and bright and never nasty, always jaunty. So there's a jaunty side of her, a funny side of her that's often been neglected in the kind of general overarching tragedy of her life. Now, with regards to the humanity of the royal family, it was one of the things that I was ticking off as I watched the Oprah interview. Meghan's loneliness, her sense of isolation, they were things that Diana was telling me back in the 1990s. And I thought that the royal family were like the Bourbons. They'd learned nothing, they'd heard everything and learned nothing. And the irony is they have been more humane, less white-gloved, big handbag as a shield. They've been more, heartfelt, as it were. And I think that actually, when you look at what the Queen's done over the last year, she's made several broadcasts, all of which were very relevant and very touching. But also, she's had these various Zoom calls with people in Australia and elsewhere, and she's shown quite the dry martini sense of humor. And also in the whole back and forth with Meghan and Harry, she has been very conciliatory and very human about it. We love Meghan and Harry, and we're very pleased at the way that Meghan's integrated into the royal family. So one of the things that baffled me about that interview was that they were prepared to grip the third rail, as it were, of race, which is a huge subject obviously in America and in Britain, and also mental health, without much evidence, it seemed to me. But obviously that's their, as I mentioned early on, that's their truth, and obviously it needs to be investigated and acted upon. No question at all that in years gone by, the courtier class at Buckingham Palace was white. It wasn't just white, it was the Guards, Eton or Harrow, or Oxford, and certainly a public school. When I say a public school, I mean a private school. And the idea of a comprehensive boy from a state school working for the palace, or a girl from a state school, was unthinkable. But these days it's a lot more, there are more women work there, more career people work there, more diplomats, more civil servants. So there's more of a mix. Could they do more? Of course they could. And I've argued that for some time, that there needs to be more of a racial mix inside the palace.
So a follow-up to that, Rachel Fall is asking, how could Meghan not have received mental health support? Harry was tied to Heads Together, and other members of the family have received mental health support.
Well, that's left me baffled as well, because I mean, his godmother, who's on speed dial, is a psychotherapist. I mean, there's a big difference between what happens. Who would the first person be that Meghan goes to? Should be Harry. the first person that Diana went to was certainly not Charles. It would be, it would be one of her girlfriends or one of her boyfriends or a friend who was a boy, like the doctor that was my intermediary. Or I don't want to paint myself too large in this, but if it was immediate issues, she'd come to me for some advice. But this whole the whole mental health thing, as you quite rightly point out, Harry and William founded the Heads Together charity, which is William has been on television on numerous occasions and has done a lot privately, discussing mental health as an illness that has been in the shadows for far too long. So, and I would flip on its head the idea that the royal family are not cognizant of mental health, because they've had people there, because of the stresses and strains of the job. Even the Queen has been for breathing exercises during her annus horribilis. Prince Charles has been for therapy. In the book, I talk about Princess Margaret going for help. So it's not like another kind of family that ignores it. They've had it and they've dealt with it. So I have to say, I found it very baffling, the fact that but having said that, it did shine a light on the fact that many women who are pregnant do have suicidal thoughts, and people have taken it further and killed themselves. So it's not like it's not an illness that doesn't exist. It wasn't caused by being in the public light. It was caused by, as I understand it,
postpartum depression.
Prepartum, I would have thought, because it was during pregnancy.
So both.
So one final question. It's 8:03, and I know that this was supposed to end at 8, so we thank you for your extra time here. But one more question. Sherry and Jim are saying they've heard speculation that Prince Philip's dying wish was for the Queen to abdicate to Prince Charles. Do you think there's any truth to that?
No, not a bit. Not one bit. No. Prince Philip will not have had that as a dying wish, I don't think.
What do you think? What do you think that his last words were? Or how do you think that the Queen...
Get off my oxygen pipe. I don't know.
Let me go. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here with all of these Trojans and Trojan friends tonight. We really appreciate you and your time and your insight and your book, of course, and signing all of these books for everyone. Really grateful. I also want to turn it back to Meredith, because I think